Hello and welcome. I am Shanta Thomas, an enrolled agent, tax strategist, and the go-to for turning IRS problems into IRS wins. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about. I'm going to be going live. So this is one of the things I'm going to start doing, hopefully once a week, where I'm going to be going live, answering real live questions. So a lot of you have questions about tax resolution, how to resolve different tax matters, and I'm going to be here to answer those questions live. Today, specifically, I'm going to be answering a question for someone who pre-submitted the question, and you can do this as well. So there is a link below in the description box where you can actually submit your question if you have a question, so that I can answer it live. Before we get started, go ahead and subscribe so that you will stay abreast of when we are going live. And you can also, again, submit your questions so I can answer them live as well. So let's start with today's question. Today's question comes from Kimberly, who says, I started a business with my daughter, a minor, in 2021. I neglected to file taxes for 3 years. Long story short, I couldn't afford to pay a tax preparer and didn't file myself for fear of doing it incorrectly. I became really overwhelmed and it snowballed into 3 years of not filing. I finally filed last year and was assessed penalties for years 2021 to 2023. I filed appeals of the penalties, which is known as a penalty abatement, and it was approved for 2021. It was denied for 2023, and it seems as if 2022 is somehow lost in the shuffle because I received 4 sets of responses from the IRS, each with 3 letters, but they are all labeled 2021 tax year and 2 for 2023 tax year. My question there any is there another basis on which I can file appeals for 2022 and 2023 tax years, especially considering my child is a minor and the penalty is charged monthly per partner? Or do I need to go ahead and make payment arrangements since they approved one appeal? So this is a good question. So let's start at the top. When you are in a partnership, so this even means if you're in a partnership with a minor, you have to file your return by a specified time every single year. And if you miss that due date to file, it's considered late. What they do is they start to assess penalties, and those penalties, I believe, are $200 per person. So for each partner per month until you file. And in addition to that, they have some additional penalties that they will add, as well as some interest. And so all of that will accrue. So when you go to file, whenever that is, could be years later, as in this case, what ends up happening is then they will assess those penalties and that interest. So how do you actually go through a process of abating penalties or getting rid of these penalties and this interest? So there are a few ways that you can actually abate penalties. The first way, which I think is the way that a lot of people are aware of, or some people are aware of, is called a first-time penalty abatement. So what a first-time penalty abatement is it just gives you, it's the first time that you're abating the penalty. So whatever the penalty is, the IRS will usually look at the oldest year, and whatever that amount is in terms of penalty, they will abate that penalty amount. So I always tell people, if you have a really small amount, let's say $200, $300, don't get that penalty abated, because if you ever run into a bigger issue, they're going to say, well, you already used your first time penalty abatement, so therefore you can't use it again, which means now you got to try to come up with another way to abate the penalties. So let's talk through what the other ways are. The other reasons are known as reasonable cause abatement types. Penalty relief. So the IRS has what's called reasonable cause, which are basically what are the different reasons that if you have a penalty that it can be abated. There are a few things that fall into these penalty reasonable cause amounts, and essentially you have to say you fall within one of these categories, and then you make that your argument. So one of the first ways is in a failure to file for if you have a failure to file. So let's say you didn't file on time, as in this case. One of the ways that you could abate that through a reasonable cause is if there was some sort of natural disaster, or inability to get records, if there was a death or illness, or there was some sort of system delay. So that's what they call, that's the first type of reasonable cause for penalty relief. And it's basically if there was some way that you were exercising ordinary care and prudence, but you were still unable to file on time. So again, the reasons that would fall under that, or some of the reasons that would fall under that, are some sort of natural disaster or fire or civil disturbance, inability to get your records, a death, an illness, or some sort of system issue in which you couldn't file. The next one is if it's an accuracy related penalty. So let's say you did something and it was not accurate. Some of the reasonable causes there could be that you demonstrated or put forth effort to be able to report it correctly the first time. The complexity of the issue could also fall into that category. It could be education experience, or that you took different steps to bring on some sort of tax advisor to assist you. Now, keep in mind, even if you did those sorts of things, you're trying to create an argument that says this is the reason as to which I couldn't file on time. And it's looking at the accuracy in this particular situation. So if you don't fall into those categories, which it doesn't sound like it does in this case, then you wouldn't qualify for those things. Keep in mind also that if you're reliant on a tax professional or lack of knowledge, those types of things aren't considered reasonable causes. It's just some of the reasons that you could, it's reasons that I often hear people say, well, this person didn't, I work with a tax professional and this person didn't file correctly or something like that. The IRS still looks at you as a person who filed to make sure that you filed it properly. And they're also looking for you as the person that filed to make sure that you're at least overseeing the work that's being done. So so far, it doesn't sound like those two reasons are reasons that we can use. So it wasn't an accuracy related issue, and there was no sort of like natural disaster or anything that you could qualify for. But one of the other things that you could look at doing for reasonable cause is what we call information related penalty. So if it's for information reason, which basically means if you show a reasonable cause that you fail to file accurate, timely information returns or pay statements, we can look at some sort of penalty relief. So something could qualify here. So under this category, what we're looking for is you acted in a responsible manner, both before and after the failure. You made by paying different things on time, requesting an extension. You tried to prevent a foreseeable failure to file on time. You fixed any issues that caused the failure. You corrected the failure as quickly as possible. So those are 4 categories. Now, under these reasonable options, I would say if you are in a situation where yes, you didn't file on time because you felt overwhelmed, but then you were able to fix it, or you're trying to fix it now, and you corrected this issue, meaning you're now working with a tax professional to make sure it doesn't happen again, or meaning you put something in place to make sure that going forward you won't end up in this situation again. Those are corrective measures. So these are things that you could use as reasonable arguments to say, I, in fact, didn't file on time, but now I put some things in place to make sure that going forward, I'm not going to be in that situation where I don't file on time again. And then the other part of this is, along with acting responsibly, you have to also prove that there were significant measures that mitigated you from filing on time. So what are some of those measures? It was the first time filer of a particular form or statement. Yes. So in this particular case, not only were you a first time filer of this form, right? So you weren't aware of the penalties, and you didn't know how to file the form. You tried to bring on somebody else. It was too costly. So you're going to try to do it yourself. So you would file you would fall under this category. So this is a two-part thing. You were a first-time filer of the form, and you have put something in place to fix this going forward. So that is something that you could use as a reasonable cause. So that's the first thing. The other thing they're looking at is if you, outside of this issue, do you have good compliance history? So if you have a good compliance history, that can also help you in this argument. The third thing is some sort of action by the IRS or an agent or something that they may have told you that ended up being wrong. You couldn't access different business records, or there's some sort of economic hardship, right, that prevented you from filing electronically. So you could kind of even also use that argument to say, I tried to hire somebody, I couldn't afford it, so I was going to try to do it myself. So in short, is there another way that you can abate these penalties? Yes. What you want to do is you want to craft an argument around the fact that you were first time filer filing this form. If you have a good compliance history, you want to outline that. You also want to outline that you tried to bring on a preparer, but due to whatever economic hardship, you were not able to bring on a preparer, so you were going to try to file it yourself. Along with that, you want to show that you have corrected the issue so it doesn't so this issue doesn't occur again. So you want to look at those things and put them into an argument when you respond to the IRS. You're probably going to have to call into the IRS and give them this information, or the letters that they've sent you, respond to the IRS using those factors. So you want to use both, and you want to outline both. I'm going to also drop a link in the chat for anyone who is watching, including the person who asked this question. And that link is going to take you to where you can find out more about the different types of penalty relief that you can get if you have some sort of reasonable cause that you are trying to come up with in order to respond to an IRS notice. So click on that link. You will see that information under the section labeled Information Return Penalties. So information return penalties. There are two sections under there, and you want to use those arguments. Again, you tried to fix the issue to going forward, and you put some sort of corrective measure in place. Also, that you were first time filer for this. You have a good compliance history if that's the case, and also the economic hardship. So now that you know there is a way to relieve these penalties, the next thing is to come up with a way to put that in place. So if you already have our notices from the IRS, then respond to those notices. Those notices do have specific dates in which you have to reply. So it usually is like 30 days. So make sure that you reply by those dates. It might be a call that you have to make, or it might be a letter or something that you have to send in. Sometimes they even give you a fax number. Make sure you send that information into the IRS, outlining the arguments that I just gave you, and put it into craft an argument for yourself. Now, if you are having an issue crafting the argument for yourself, an easy way to do that is to go on ChatGPT, go on some sort of AI, and go in there and say, put in a prompt that basically says, I received a letter from the IRS that I owe money, explain what happened. You can upload it, but sometimes it doesn't always read the upload. So try to outline what the issue was. Then say, I need to craft a response. I'm going to be crafting a response based on these. And then copy and paste the sections I just told you. Copy and paste those sections. Ask them to create a legal argument for you to respond to the letter that you received. Send that letter in or fax it if they give you a way to fax it in, mail it in, send that response in to the IRS for your specific issue. If you need to call in, then ask ChatGPT instead, or whatever AI you use. Ask them instead to give you a argument that you can state on a phone call. So ask them to craft it in a different way. So instead of a letter that you would write, ask them to give you that same language, but in a like in a conversation type of, like a script, so that you can call into the IRS and share that information with them to relieve the debt. Now, there is no guarantee, even if you use these reasonable causes, there's no guarantee that they'll remove them, but it's going to help your case, that it's going to help you to possibly be able to remove it. So I have used reasonable cause, and what I have found is in some cases they've removed everything, and in some cases they remove part of it. So they may not remove everything, but I think if you go in with these arguments, I think they will remove at least part of what you owe for 2022 and 2023. Now, one of the questions specifically, or in that question, you also asked a question, like that doesn't make a difference because the person is a minor, the other partner is a minor. They don't look at that when they consider their when they consider whether or not they're going to remove your penalties. They don't look at whether the person was a minor. The only thing they really care about is what are the laws, and they really stick to whatever the laws or the things are around how they can remove or not remove a penalty. And usually the person you have on the phone isn't the only person that has to look at it. So it usually goes to them, but then it also has to go to like their manager to be approved. So that's why it's really important to craft an argument that aligns with the tax law so that they can remove it according to the law, because that's the only thing that's going to stick. Even if you can get the first person to approve it, that doesn't mean their boss is going to approve it. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you stick to what the laws are. Any other circumstances, they're not going to consider. So just use those arguments and then go in and ask ChatGPT to create outline a letter for you that you can send into the IRS that you can utilize. So I don't see any follow-up questions to that question, but for anyone who is watching, that is how I would handle any penalty that I have. I would look at what are the different reasonable causes that I could put in place to actually remove the penalties. Most of the time, too, keep in mind, they won't remove the interest, but they will often remove the penalty. So you still may have interest, even if they remove all the penalties, you still may have some interest. So just be aware of that, too. So that's all I have for you guys today. That was the question that I had on file. I don't see any additional questions, so I will leave it there. If you do have questions that come in later, feel free to drop those and I'll come back and I will respond to those. If you have a question that you want to ask so that you can get some clarity on how to resolve your tax resolution matter, please feel free to look in the description box and click on the link so that you can submit your question. You can ask that question live, or you can ask that question by submitting it online, and then we will answer it live and answer any follow-up questions that you have. So I hope that was helpful to today's listeners, and I hope that brings you some resolve to your issue. All right, that's all we have. Have an amazing day.